Live back with you tonight here on News at Prime. The South African Council of Churches welcomes the Section 89 Independent Panel report under the former Chief Justice Sandile Ngcobo as a watershed moment for our constitutional democracy. This comes after they had previously criticized Parliament for its failure to hold the office of the President accountable. For more on this, we're now joined by the Speaker for the South African Council of Churches, I beg your pardon, Bishop Malusi Mpumlwana, the General Secretary for SACC. Your Grace, good evening, and thank you very much for your time and for joining us tonight here on News at Prime. We, of course, are particularly looking at what the Church is going to say this time around, because we know that the Church was quite vocal previously with the former President when such constitutional conflict matters arose.
You're perfectly correct. It was when the constitutional matters arose. Actually, what most people do not know is that even in the case of President Zuma, we were engaging with him in his office for 2 years, since April 2014. And the only time we made a public statement about this was in April 2016. And so we don't necessarily, even at that time, it was because there was a constitutional court ruling, and it was in the context of that we were talking. And that's why we believe in the constitutional processes as much as possible. It does not matter whether we like a person or we don't like a person. We have to make sure that the country sustains its institutions and makes sure that everything is handled. I think that the way the African National Congress handled both the case of Mr. Mbeki and Mr. Zuma was outside of the normal processes of law. It's obviously their right and prerogative, but it doesn't help the country because the country needs, we're a young democracy, and that democracy needs to test its institutions as much as possible and make sure that they mature. And that's why it's a good thing that's why we say that it's a step in the right direction to have this Section 89 report, and then it's a first step, and then the other steps must follow and take their course. And there must be opportunity for, I think, the President to account for himself and present himself and his views be cross-examined and understood. And that's really the way it ought to happen. That's why the church leaders, when they met yesterday, they came to that conclusion. But we decided to wait for we were told that there's going to be a statement by the President, and when that did not happen, we went ahead and issued what we had considered.
Now, of course, there's the hot debate that is currently going on whether or not the President should respond by stepping down to the findings of the panel, saying there is prima facie evidence that suggests that he would have violated the laws of the country, PRECA, and the Constitution in putting himself in a situation where there's conflict of interest between his private interest and his position as President. And of course, the debate, and I'm sure the Church would want to weigh in on this, is that we must hold him to a higher standard. And questions of integrity when it comes to the President should be paramount. And therefore, on those grounds, he should really, in integrity, step down.
Definitely, by all means, that we should hold the office of the President with a higher standard than anyone else. I would imagine that we would say the same for bishops as well. But they're all fallible. They do these things that we're all horrified by. And that is why you have got due processes, so that due processes can actually establish all that needs to be with regard to any person. And that's why we said if you don't use due processes, you set precedents that cannot be sustained in law because you are not using law. I mean, it would be nice to use only ethics. Unfortunately, human society is not all that ethical. And that is why you need regulated systems of law. And
as far as how the politicians are handling this, then how do you feel? Because civil society has said, well, the politicians need to be very, very, very clear and cautious in how they are handling this.
There is no greater caution than law in a constitutional democracy. The only thing that is a standard for everybody, doesn't matter who you are, is the law. No one is above the law. Let's use the law and stay with that.
And as far as the fractional viewpoints that are emerging?
They are irrelevant if you use law. You know, when this thing first broke out, we made our statement and said, we want all the facts and the truth to come out through the normal investigation systems. And that's what we're hoping will. I mean, you got the SARS investigation going on. You got the Hawks investigating. Where are all these things adding up to? That's why you need a proper system. It cannot just be, that's why we say we welcome this, but it's the first step.
And there's a concern then, Bishop, that if we are indeed going that route of process, which of course you have emphasized quite significantly here this evening, we might find ourselves with a situation where we are dealing with a president who is now constantly having to defend himself in these processes that you've mentioned, either be it the South African Revenue Service, be it the Reserve Bank, be it the Public Protector, and they'll be dragging him back and forth with court reviews and so on and so forth. And he will not be taking care of why he has been appointed, that is to serve the country.
That is why we said in our statement we want these matters to be handled without delay, as speedily as possible. I mean, the fact is that everybody is entitled to a due process of law. And that we've defended that for everybody. I mean, you remember President Zuma used to say, I want my day in court. That's the right he has. Everybody must go to court. Everybody must be brought through a due process. It is, honestly, it might not be perfect, but it is the only standard that cuts across everybody.
And of course, at this time, we are called upon again as civil society, as ordinary members of society, but as the church, to be a little bit vigilant in as far as holding those in power accountable. What lessons have we learned from that previous incident with the previous president?
Well, you know, this is part of the reason why we've been calling for electoral reform, where the parliamentarians are directly accountable to their constituencies rather than to the party bosses. Exactly to do with this, that party bosses determine what the MPs should say or do, what they should think, and that's exactly what happened the last time. I mean, can you believe it? You have the lawyers of the president say, no, this is a fireproof. The lawyers of the police have the same chorus. The lawyers of parliament have the same chorus. How come all these lawyers seem to have a unison unless it's orchestrated? Now, does orchestration of statements not amount to obstruction of justice? Actually, that it was. And then what then happened is that the Constitutional Court then said, Parliament has erred. Do you know, Parliament did not even pass a resolution of regret that responds to what the Constitutional Court had said. And for this reason, the conference of the SACC then went on and said, really, Parliament should dissolve itself. So the lesson is that this Parliament must act with integrity, and that's what they always have to do.
Bishop Malusi, Mpumlwana, I appreciate your time. Thanks so much for coming on. The General Secretary of the SACC and the Church calling for process and saying there is no greater standard of objectivity than the law.